Okay, we have given it a couple of minutes, so we are just going to start now. So hi and welcome everyone. A quick reminder that this is recorded and will be shared on YouTube. My name is Josefin Westborg and I will be your host tonight. And this roundtable we're having tonight is brought to you. I'm sorry, this is 2 seconds. Okay, that was my Google Assistant giving us information. Yes, but this roundtable is not brought to you by my Google Assistant. It's brought to you by the Transformative Play Initiative at Uppsala University, the Department of Game Design. And we at the Transformative Play Initiative focuses on role-playing games as vehicles for change. And today we are going to have a panel for 1 hour. And then we will have 30 minutes where you get to ask questions to the panelists. And for the questions, we love for you to use the Q&A function so we can see them. All of our panelists have held talks for us as part of this event series before. And for those of you that have missed any of the talks, I will give a short presentation of our guests and what they talked about. But you can also find all their talks on our YouTube channel. So our wonderful panel today consists of Stavropoulos, a design leader creating experiences for games, government, sports, and museum. And in his talk, Innovating for Growth, Designing a Culture of Safety in Games, he shared his insights about growing psychological safety in relation to games. Then we also have Elektra Diacolombriano, that is a psychologist and a researcher that works as a lecturer at the Institution for Counseling and Psychological Studies and as a psychotherapist. In her talk, Beyond the Couch, Psychotherapy and Live Action Role-Playing Games, she gave an overview of psychotherapeutic methodologies in relation to LARP. Then we have Jeonsu Julian Kim, that is a game designer, a writer, and a cultural consultant who works in tabletop games, LARPs, and interactive fiction. They explored ways in which fear-based play can be utilized to create healing experiences and how to do this in a safe and inclusive way in their talk, Journey into Fear, Horror as a Vehicle for Healing and Transformative Play. Then we have Katrin Geneuss, that is a coordinating lecturer at the El Mundo program at the LMU Munich University. She had the last presentation in this season in March, where she talked about to play or not to play, EduLARP in curricular settings, where we got some deeper insights into pros, cons, and pitfalls from a didactical perspective when implementing LARP in formal educational settings. And last but not least, the first presenter we had, that is Lauri Lukka, a licensed psychologist and a designer. And he started us off in January in his postmortem called Designing Intensity, a case study of an extraordinary 24-hour scenario session. So a big and warm welcome to all of you. We are so happy to have you here. So let's get into it. I would love for you all to get the chance to describe a transformative experience that you have had as a result of engaging in role-playing games. And maybe, Katrin, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you very much, Josephine. A transformative experience. Well, there have been a few, and I was thinking that a few years ago, I participated in a live role-playing game called 1942. And I'm not going to expand on the plot. It should be sufficient to say that there were 2 opposing groups, and they speak different languages, these 2 groups, and only a few individuals understand the other's language, but mostly they don't. And one group is the oppressors, and the other group is being oppressed. And the oppressed group partly forms to resistance. And now to my experience. I belonged to the oppressors group. And it was fascinating to me what power and in-group coherence was created by the oppressed group. Me as a character not understanding them, I still had formal power over the group, but my character was deeply insecure by the linguistic exclusion. And by linguistic, I do not only mean the words, the semantics, but also not understanding body language, not knowing what intonation means. And like, why were they smiling at each other all of a sudden after having said something? Or the tone, why were they speaking in such a happy intonation when they should be devastated by something my character had done to them? So that was really driving my character mad, and she tried similar strategies. Like when my character was talking to them in her language, she knew they would not understand the words, but she would yell, like ask the same questions over and over and demand a yes or a no, knowing that they would not understand, or raise her voice. And also, like, something else she would just explore was that she would demand that they, the oppressed group, that they say their names in her language and with her accent. So all of a sudden she had ownership over the pronunciation of their names, and thereby over their identity in a way. And and that deeply impressed me, because I myself have lived in multilingual contexts where I would not understand the majority's language in the beginning. And I might have sensed like these power relations, but it never came that clear to me what it was about and how to play with that, how to explore that. And now, since I'm a lecturer at the Department for Teacher Education, that inspired me to develop settings for EduLARP with teachers, so that they and their students could explore the power of linguistic devices as well. And not only the linguistic exclusion and oppression and power, but also like how to create inclusion, how to positively relate to people who do not speak the language. And by also exploring not only the nonverbal aspects like body language and facial expression, but also consciously using linguistic markers like pauses, intonation, and such. So that was my experience, and it still sticks to me. Like, I still get excited when I think of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as a fellow EduLARPer, I can also relate to, like, I want to use this in my work, and how can I work with this? And to get to do that is amazing. Thank you. Elektra, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, let me say, Katrin, what an interesting example, like the symbolic use of language and how it, it can relate to role playing. Thank you for sharing this. Now, I have a lot of examples in my mind. I think that I usually go into any role playing experience thirsty for anything, any transformation. But I think the most intensely transformative experience I had with role playing games was in the period after I lost my father. I think I was consciously or not consciously using a role-playing experience to process my grief. One instance that I can think about, we were playing a game designed by a friend of mine and colleague, Alexandros Alexiou. It's called Underworld. It's an abstract game that is inspired by Greek mythology, by the Greek myths around, afterlife. And there was this recurring scene throughout the game that Alexandros, as the facilitator, would come to a player, tap on his or her shoulder, and that player had to leave the character that they were playing for the moment, and they were assigned the character of Orpheus looking for Eurydice in the underworld. So there was a scene where I was playing Andromache. I don't know if you're familiar with these, mythological people from ancient Greek mythology. Anyway, she was in the underworld with her husband. So I was, hugging, the player that was playing my husband, and I was feeling very serene being in the underworld, but being with somebody that I loved. And that was the instance where the facilitator comes, taps on my shoulders, and all of a sudden I have to be Orpheus that is desperately looking for Eurydice in the underworld. And I just turned to the GM and I said, no, please don't ask me to do it right now. And of course, I could totally opt out of this, but after that, I couldn't stop crying. And, it was very intense how even in this fictional setting of the game, I was processing, the grief of not being able to be, even for a little bit, with the person that you have lost, and how, I didn't want to live again during that game, the desperation of looking for that person and not finding it. So yeah, it was very intense. I dedicated after this game, I think 2 or 3 therapy sessions to to process the experience. So that's it for me. I hope it wasn't too intense too soon.
No, I don't think it was. Thank you, Elektra, so much for sharing that. And I think that says something about where you come from and who you are and how smart you are, that you're like, okay, I'm booking therapy sessions for this. When I had a flash with a death experience connected to LARP, what I did was go out and have champagne. I'm not sure that's the best solution. I think yours is way better. So go with Elektra's, everyone else. Okay, so thank you again. And I would also love to hear something from John about a transformative experience.
Sure, thank you. So quite a while ago, I was playing a game that it was a LARP where we were physically moving across great distances during a war. And my character was one that was an injured soldier. So I physically could not move to most locations, even though that was required to get the most out of the game. So for me, the transformative experience was having to rely on others for most things, where like growing up, I've been in situations where I've had to take care of others. So in this game, I literally physically could not go anywhere unless I asked someone for help, and would then just be on their time, right? So like when they decided to go for however long it took, I was very vulnerable in those situations. And it really, it made me trust people more. And it definitely helped me early on become better at my job, managing people. Like I feel like that was maybe the first or second year that I began managing people professionally. And that experience made me a better manager, made me let go more. And yeah, I'm very thankful for the experience.
Thank you. And yes, bringing stuff into our everyday life. I love it. I'm here for it. Let's all go for it. Okay, Jeonsu, do you want to go next?
Yeah, mine actually has quite a few similarities with Elektra's example. But a few years ago, I was at Festival 11. It was the run in the UK, and it was my second time playing it, so I was quite familiar with the format and everything. And there's a lot of writing on this on NordicLARP.org, for example, if anybody wants to look more into it. But just to kind of summarize it quickly, takes place in New York during the 1980s, very centered on like the queer community there. And specifically the themes are very death related and having to do with the AIDS crisis. And ritualized grieving is built into the game. On the second day of play, I got a phone call from my mother back home saying that a family friend had passed away. And she had passed away from something that was very similar to one of the characters that I was closely related to in the game was experiencing. And this was at nighttime. Ritualized grieving was going to take place the next day again. And I was kind of faced with this path or a branching path kind of situation of, do I sit out this kind of next instance of ritualized grieving? Because nobody would fault me for that after getting a phone call like that. Nobody would be like, oh, you're ruining the game by sitting that out. Like, everybody was very supportive of whatever I needed to do at that time. Or do I continue to go through with it and experience grief in a fictional context, but with real emotion having to do with bleed from my real life? And after giving it a lot of thought and talking to people, I decided that I would much rather go through the grief ritual with, surrounded by other people who are also grieving, given like in a fictional context. I'd rather experience that with other people and have actions to take and know what the kind of the protocol is for what to do and how you show your grief, how you interact with others, how you interact with the world in kind of this scenario, than to kind of sit in my room in grieving by myself while others kind of experience this thing. I decided that like it was safe enough, first of all, and also it would be cathartic. So I went through it. I cried a lot. I cried more than I've ever cried in any other LARP because things came up. And of course, grief can still be very isolating, even if you are experiencing it with other people, especially so if the grief is separated by something that is happening in one's personal life versus within the fiction of the game. But it was incredibly useful and taught me how important ritual is for me when it comes to grief and extreme emotion in general. That having a kind of a clear menu almost, I guess, of options of I'm going to express myself through, for instance, like picking a flower and then placing it in a special place, or being with other people and not having to speak about it, just experiencing the emotion in a kind of nonverbal space. And I've tried to kind of integrate that thinking of how much ritualizing things helps me personally. And I know it helps like a lot of other people who I've spoken to since then. It was an interesting kind of framework for it for me. It was very helpful.
Thank you so much. And the experience I mentioned before for myself was also just a little loving. So I hear ya, and there's something special going on in that ritual state, but also to be allowed to just let out things that maybe wasn't in the game, and to see other players where it's like we're sitting next to each other and I can tell that your grief is connected to something else. We both have something here, and that bonds us together, even if we haven't had time to even speak to each other yet. It's very fascinating. Thank you. And then we go to Lauri. Would you like to share with us?
Sure. Thank you so much. It has been wonderful to listen and hear about your experiences. And when I started to think about my own transformative experience, I was struck with the theme that I also mentioned in my lecture, that suddenly when I started to think back on all of those games, that there's just so many, and nothing kind of particularly stands out. And I'm wondering about this experience that I had. Okay, so how would I pick from all of these experiences the one that I consider transformative? And then I think about the questionnaire that I held for these players who had participated in the 24-hour game session that I organized. And almost none of them mentioned any specific game, even though I had kind of thought that they would talk about that particular game. There's this one chapter where I was this character, and then this happened, and I have been thinking about that afterwards. Spontaneously, and this is spontaneously, there was only a very few, very brief kind of mentions of specific games and specific narratives. And now I'm thinking, what does this mean? Why is it so that I have the same feeling that these people who are looking back on 2 years ago, or what I consider was an intense experience, they are not telling any particular narrative. But what they say, what was meaningful to them, was the social relationships, the friendships that were created, the kind of broader thing that occurred between that, maybe the specificities that had maybe blurred a bit. So as I'm thinking about this, I maybe open up a bit about this transformative and experience as a concept. That first of all, of course, with an experience, there's the experience as itself, something that is really implicit, bodily, really hard to put your words on. And then there's the narrative of the experience that occurs afterwards, where we make sense of the experience, as we have done here now, where we kind of process it. What has happened? What does this mean? And I think this is really interesting, and I make a distinction now that there's specific effects that we can reach through a narrative that we can tell to ourselves and others, but it's different from the non-specific and diffused effects that these games have more broadly, that we have maybe much more harder time to put our finger on. That what does it mean that we played 10 games? What's the aggregate sum of all of these games when it goes beyond any specific narrative? And then we go into somewhere in the implicit realm, which is really hard to put our finger on. But one thing that when I think about this is that there's one thing I can put my finger on. It's a friendship created through role-play. And that has been transformative in itself. For instance, a very dear friend that I have met through a role-playing game, without that role-playing game, I wouldn't have that friend and whom I can trust and rely on. And I think it's a bit of a different experience, but experience nevertheless.
Thank you so much for that. I love us going a bit theoretical also and adding the extra layers. That's just nerd in me shows up. Each of you deals with safety in some way in your works. What are some of the reasons that safety is so important in transformative play, do you think? Or do you have any specific examples that you come to think about in relation to this? So, Jeonsu, would you like to start?
Sure. So kind of some notes here I want to refer to. Broadly, kind of speaking, at first, I think the main benefit in my experience is that it takes away a lot of the juggling aspect of the guesswork of, do I need an entire channel in my mind right now dedicated to guessing at what people's boundaries are? Because if you don't lay the groundwork, you're starting from kind of a blank slate and you're having to essentially read the room continuously, which you should be doing to an extent as you're going, but you're really starting with not enough information, so you're constantly needing to kind of make assumptions and analyze people's reactions and body language and whatnot. So once you have tools that are specifically taught to help calibrate at the beginning and then as you're going, that makes the labor of that just much easier, because you don't have to guess at, well, I don't know whether this person is scared of this thing in real life or just their character is afraid of it. And my like specific example of this is actually from, I was on a podcast where we were playing second edition D&D Red Death. Well, we weren't playing second edition, but it was Red Death, which was from second edition originally and was adapted to 5e. And this is going to sound potentially so silly, but there was a scene that was very emotional for a lot of us and involved going into somebody's mind to try to like kind of help heal them and find out information, because something supernatural was happening to them. And one thing was manifesting as a giant teddy bear, like this protective force of like kind of guarding the inner child, and it manifested as this person's childhood teddy bear, but in giant scale, kind of like a supernatural teddy bear. And for me, stuffed animals are like a big, like, they symbolize a lot for me. They are very much tied to, I still have a lot of my childhood stuffed animals, and like even as an adult, I've collected more. And they represent so much innocence and like all the best parts of childhood and like the things that you want to protect, and also vulnerability. And I had to establish a boundary of like, nothing terrible can, like, there can be the threat of something terrible happening. This, guardian teddy bear can be injured, but it cannot be destroyed or die throughout the process, because that's going to make it so that that's all I'm thinking about. The story will be compromised. My like ability to fit the character will be compromised if this giant teddy bear gets too gravely hurt because of what it symbolizes to me in my life. And everybody was very, because I knew this group, I'd been playing with them for a while, and they were friends, and I knew that they took safety seriously, and that like we had these mechanics and calibration tools present for a reason. I knew that like once that was established, it wasn't like, and now we make fun of you because it's that silly. It was taken seriously, and that was extremely helpful in that specific scenario.
Thank you so much. That was very specific. I like that. And yes, I can relate. I might have 4 teddy bears sitting behind me that you can't see because of my blurred background. So totally get it. I would also love to hear from you, Katrin, because you have a slightly different way into this. I guess that you meet a lot of non-volunteer LARPers, which is a different way in.
Yes, definitely. Since we apply EduLARP in curricular contexts, we meet a whole classroom of kids, and we're supposed to convey some topic, some theme, explore that. And we as educators, we choose EduLARP as a method instead of going for, I don't know what it could be, translation, textbook work. So it's the EduLARP. And of course, we carefully ease them into it, because we know that safety is super important when it comes to transformation in the sense of learning and growing, especially when it touches your personality and identity, which is the case in language learning, as I mentioned before. So we try to be very careful. And one reason for that is also that we know from research in other fields that negative learning experiences can really have an impact on your attitude towards the entire subject. So let's say that we're doing a LARP in a history lesson, and it's going well for almost everyone, but maybe not for some. Then it could be the case that these children never want to engage in history lessons anymore, just because they are transferring the whole negative experience to the curricular context. And that, of course, would be devastating. And that is a kind of a learning transformation as well. just on the negative side, where we do not want them to have them. So our question always is, what can we do? Because we cannot totally avoid negative experiences. There might be triggers, there might be negative interaction, and people, if you have a classroom like of 30 people, not everyone will just embrace LARPing. They might not really like it. So if that was a negative experience, we always try to open spaces for that on different levels. So they get to write about their experience, they get to talk to the educators, they get to talk to their peers, so that we make sure that they really debrief and that they dissect the playing experience from the curricular content. And thereby, even if the experience was a negative one, they still can deal with it and not transfer it completely to the subject.
Thank you so much. I relate. Yep, seen that happening. Okay, Lauri, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. It's an important topic, safety, and I really like the word that was used previously, that there's this sort of a foundation that is safety, that it's so important that it's kind of the bedrock for all of the interaction that occurs with the team. And again, I'm thinking about this this topic because for me personally, my thinking is that what is important is to go beyond in a game, where you find something new in yourself, in others, which means that you often gonna dare to do something that you wouldn't have dared otherwise. You find a new side to yourself. Perhaps there is an interaction that you find really intriguing. You find a new role you can try. And this is the novelty that is really important to me. And now I think the safety is necessary for this novelty to occur. And again, I think about what are some of my kind of techniques or things that I have used to kind of foster this foundation to occur. And I think one of the key points for me as someone who leads and designs these games was when I found improvisational theater, and suddenly I think things sort of clicked for me. That when I started to employ improvisational theater as a kind of warm up to live action role playing game, it was suddenly for the team much easier to go to the live action role playing game than if they would have just listened to the content or done a bit of a workshop. But rather, I would do 1 hour, 1.5 hours of improvisational theater, starting really easy as you can go. Verbal associations, a little bit of movement. And through this, actually, what occurs is that you build safety, because you put the boundary very low and people start to find something new, but they do this very gradually in very small steps. And after 1.5 hours, there's safety in place for the group that they can go towards a harder exercise, which often occurs through a live action role-playing game. So I think the dynamic between safety that is necessary and then the novelty aspect is really intriguing and very important to bear in mind.
Thank you. Yes, very much so. And I would say that connects back a lot to what Katrin was talking about also, about creating that safety in the classroom to be able to participate, to dare play with the content. Elektra, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. I think I will continue on what Lauri was just saying. That's more or less what I had also in mind. You know, when you're asking a psychologist, a psychotherapist, like, is safety important? The answer will be yes. And when you ask why, most probably they don't have a very ready answer, because we take it so much for granted that we don't often feel the need to analyze it. It's a given. I think that whether we're talking about transformation in role-playing games, transformation in everyday life, transformation in therapy, like, the framework doesn't really matter. I think that what is common in all these processes is that like Lauri also said, novelty and change cannot occur without, at least a minimal physical and psychological safety. When people feel threatened, unsafe, stressed, I think we all, to an extent, have the tendency to become more rigid. It's as if the self-concept that we have, not only the self-concept, now that I think about it, but everything that our personality includes, like our self-concept, our values, our opinions, everything becomes more rigidly structured because it's our way of putting up an armor against the threat that we are perceiving. And that is the opposite of, transformation. That is a very regressive process. So I think safety is maybe the most basic thing in transformative play or in transformation in general.
Thank you so much. And then we go over to John.
Thank you. I think I'm going to say a lot of things that Elektra just said, but hopefully I can do it from a different perspective. For me, it's hard. I've run many conferences where I've had organizational teams and we've done surveys of various games and gotten feedback and iterated. And what I've seen commonly is if a game is focused on some sort of growth and exploration, it's hard for people to grow if they're closed off, if they're defensive, if, like Elektra said, if they're wearing their armor. And when they're defensive, they're not just protecting themselves, but they're also very much focused on the external, right? Because they're focused on the threats coming after them. And by doing so, they're not reflecting internally. So it's both putting a boundary up and focusing everything outward. And then for the sake of speed, right? Because if you feel anxious, you want to move fast, you tend to use shortcuts and you stop listening closely and make assumptions, which then makes it less likely you're going to grow from this experience. So for me, safety systems, tools, principles help lower anxiety, increase trust. And I know for me, it helps rebalance power, right? Where if you go into a group with strangers or into a new organization, there's a question of what are my rights? And I think these techniques makes it explicit what I am allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do. And by doing so, it's increasing transparency, which for me and others increases accessibility, which then allows us to put ourselves in a space where we feel vulnerable, which increases the chances that we'll grow.
Thank you so much. I would actually like to tag on this and move, because you touched upon now like transparency, and Lauri, you were talking about actual like working with improv to help create that feeling. Do you have any other techniques or practices that you sometimes or more often than others use to aid in this process of transformation and in relation also to safety, but transformation overall. But now we kind of established here that safety and transformation, they need to go hand in hand. So some specific techniques you like, and feel free to just use the hand now, because here you might pop up something. Elektra, please go ahead.
I'll start with something that nobody is expecting the psychologist to say. I use counseling skills. I think that basic counseling skills, I'm not talking here about, very sophisticated techniques that somebody must spend 3 to 4 years, practicing in a master's course in psychotherapy. I'm talking about very basic techniques that have to do with active listening, authenticity, clear communication. I think they can go a long way in creating safety before, during, and after the game.
Thank you. John, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one thing I do to try to make an experience more accessible is by making materials available in advance in whatever format is easiest or most useful to the attendees. So that, and then additionally giving them the ability to submit feedback, whether it's saying in advance, I would prefer this not be in this game, or I don't understand what this means, or I have concerns about XYZ, whatever it is, or I'm really excited about this thing. I really hope it's centered in the game and not skipped over. Whatever it might be, making it available up front, because different people have different needs. And in the game itself, when people are running around and so many things are happening and there's so much information, they might not be able to process quickly enough to be able to give you the feedback that would help make this experience accessible to them. So making those materials available in advance. And I would end with also saying, not making assumptions, right? Asking people what is accessible for you, right? Because I could create a list of 1,000 things that are accessible, but maybe I'm still missing something that is accessible to the specific individuals attending my event. So instead of assuming, I will ask and then accommodate.
Thank you. Then we have Lauri.
Here we go. I'll first start up with a personal experience I had actually, I think a month ago, with a game that, which topic was the COVID pandemic. And it was written with an intention that the COVID pandemic, or an underlying assumption that COVID pandemic was a traumatic negative experience. And then the beginning of the game started with a small discussion, and one of the questions I think was something: what was some kind of a loss or a negative experience, or what did COVID pandemic mean to you? And I noticed everyone many people were thinking about some sort of a loss, and then there was me, and actually I was lucky about this because I felt quite alone there, because for me, COVID pandemic wasn't that negative for me personally. I was very lucky, and I consider that I'm very lucky in this regard. But I felt alone in this. That was really interesting, and I was like thinking, why is this so? That I felt that there's an assumption that this is supposed to be a negative, and for me it wasn't. And I think that was really a bad place to start the game. And now I think it goes back to this question about what techniques do I use, and I think I've designed some games that have some sort of message, but often when there's an intention in the game, I try to leave it very vague, because anytime, let's take, you take any topic, creativity, you take universities, you take learning, whatever it is, people have very different relations with these topics. And if you come with a certain intention there, it can feel to some people, even though you don't intend it to be sort of that you leave some people or some approaches outside of the game, it might happen. So I think for one of the things I like to bear in mind is that I don't really know how people approach this topic. And it might be positive, it might be negative, whatever it is, I want to tell about. The subject matter here now is the dynamics in a rock band and the struggling artist here. What does it mean? And it can mean very different things. And then we begin rather openly. And I think openly is an important word, that it kind of, I want people to have a feeling that whatever, if they hate the topic, fine. If they love it, whatever, everything is fine. And I think that's the starting point I would like to start with.
Thank you so much. Katrin.
Thank you, Lauri. I would like to connect directly to that, because it's especially that openness of live role playing that can be very unusual in school contexts. So we kind of have to bridge, or have to make like a scaffolding technique to get there with the students. And once they engage in the live role playing game, they really dare to embrace that openness, and they dare to enjoy the many different things going on all at once without feeling that it's too overwhelming. And in order to get there, we have several scaffolding techniques. So we start very small, almost traditional. So we hand out a sheet. That is something that they're used to, and maybe it's some information about the character. And thereby, we also include the teacher. The teacher gets the very same sheet. And that is the first step of putting them on par so that they can interact together in the LARP later on, the teacher and the students on the same terms, which is kind of unusual, at least in Germany. And step by step, we make different exercises, verbal, non-verbal, lots of drama techniques, improvisation theater. And then they also get to approach their character. And then, like after, I don't know, 7 to 10 exercises, we feel that they are ready for the EduLARP experience.
Thank you so much. Jeonsu.
Yeah, so I kept thinking about, there's a specific technique or design element that I really like to integrate into game. It doesn't work perfectly with every game. It's something that you have to see whether it's the right match. But I really like the ability to be able to replay scenes. And I think I might have first encountered this probably in Deranged by Maria Niefe Bergman Hamming, where you get, we're playing a scene potentially over and over and over again in multiple scenes. It's ingrained into the game, and you get to have different experiences each time. Yeah, it's one of my all-time favorite games, and also one of my favorite games ever run. But I've tried, I actually built replaying scenes into one of my LARPs, The Truth About Eternity. I forgot the name of it for a second because I explained. But I think it kind of addresses a few different things, because I think with a lot of like anxious role players, for instance, there's a lot of fear of, am I doing this right? Did I make the most out of this scene? Am I doing this the way that is going to like serve the other players the most? Especially for newer LARPers, there tends to be this fear of, is my inexperience or is my trying to experiment with the scene in a certain way going to hamper other people's experience? And so it kind of alleviates that, and that you get to do it again. And so you get to try to experiment with different things, and you're not going to be punished for that. The idea is that you're encouraged to try different avenues and different approaches. And sometimes what I like to do is have there be like a very specific intent about how you're going to replay each scene, because some people will get more kind of, I was going to say more juice for their transformative experiences, for lack of a better word coming to mind, from playing through maybe like the most traumatic version of a scene, like the most devastating one, because maybe confronting worst case scenarios is something that they need at that moment. While other people are going to maybe find more from playing out the most like uncertain, the scene and the version of the scene in which there is the most uncertainty, because uncertainty is something in their life they are trying to come to terms with. And so having replayability as a feature of a game kind of helps allow people to have these different experiences within the same framework and to get what they want and what they need out of it. And also it's just, I find it it's very interesting from a storytelling perspective. And I find it very valuable just from a narrative perspective as well.
Thank you so much. I love that. I really like when you get to replay scenes, and I feel I don't do it enough. I've thought about doing that also as part of workshopping before to really help with that. Haven't tried it out yet though. Okay, we don't have a lot of time left, but I would love to hear what each of you think is the cutting edge or the future with regard specifically to using role-playing games as tools for personal or social change. So, Elektra, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I think that the potential that role-playing games have for change has always been there, and we are just kind of reinventing what was already there and trying to make the rest of the world, recognize it. So for me, what is really cutting edge in a way is the recognition that this field gets, and that people are starting more and more to take it seriously, if I can put it that way, because I don't know, even a decade or 2 decades ago, talking about personal transformation through gaming was okay, maybe not in all parts of the world, maybe in the Nordic countries not so much, but in my part of the world it was unheard of. Like first of all, we needed to, I don't know, make our parents, convince our parents that us playing D&D doesn't mean we are in some, weird cult that is really dangerous for our mental well-being, or stuff like that. I see John laughing because he also has Greek origins, so he knows what I'm talking about. So yes, for me, it's about reinventing what was already there, and also about calibrating it and refining it in a systematic way, creating tools and giving tools to people who want to use them.
Thank you so much. Lauri, do you want to go next?
Thank you. Elektra, I completely agree with you. I think there has been progress made in the last years and maybe even decades. However, I would also say that at the same time that there is progress, that it's slower than I would like it to see. And I think there is really something interesting here, that at the same time I'm thinking that the activity that we love, that one of the most beautiful mediums that there is, the possibility to explore other worlds and other roles and other identities through role playing is fantastic. However, not all of people agree. In fact, many people would say that that is the most stupid idea that they have ever thought of. And I think I try to relate that people, just many people don't want to do this, or they would rather, they would go to a movie, or some people have maybe some potential, but I think we are in some sort of a cultural niche that exists. And I think there's kind of several ways to think about this. And I think the important thing is to think about, one, the medium that we are thinking about, and two, the target audience that we want to reach. Starting with the target audience, I think it would be lovely to see this becoming more mainstream and reaching more audiences. And I think it can be said that there are some undiscovered people who would take up this as a hobby if they would discover it and if it was reachable to them. And this means that I think all of us know some people who are kind of like, if I would try, maybe I would like it. And then when they come in, they just love it. And you know that they have come to the right place. So how can we help those people who haven't discovered this? How can we lower the threshold and ease them in? Give them easy opportunities, create forums, create groups that are welcoming, as opposed to playing with themselves, but rather open their arms to other people, and that's really important. And the second thing I would like to add is the importance of going beyond our medium. We are now in a cultural corner. We need to work together with digital games, organizations. In pedagogy, we have to go to counseling, we have to branch out. We have to take the core that we have here and give it away to other disciplines, to other organizations in other contexts. And I think that's super meaningful. So those are my two things. Work together with others and take this somewhere it's not seen before, and then make it easy to pick up.
Thank you. Katrin, do you want to go?
Yes, of course. I also have 2 points. So first of all, I think the future for EduLARP in curricular educational settings is prosperous. I think it really can enrich the subjects and subject teaching a lot. Nonetheless, and it has been said before, we need to offer structured, well-structured content and kind of guidelines so that even non-LARPers, maybe teachers inclined to drama techniques, that they dare to apply this very complex technique, which is closely related to drama. So structure and guidelines. And then the second one is just what you said, Lauri, connecting to other fields of research, to other fields of education and developments. It could be, I was thinking about drama first, because different to what you said, Elektra, EduLARP has been a method developed in the 80s and 90s, developed for classrooms in curricular teaching. It just was called process drama, just a different name. And it didn't come from the role-playing community. It came more from the drama side. And it never really got implemented because it was too complex, I guess. But it's been there and then kind of vanished, and now it is reappearing again, and it is connecting to multimedia, digital teaching, and I think this is where the future lies. And we at Munich University, we do have a research project at the moment where we try to integrate film sequences, short video clips in the playing experiences. We'll see how that works.
Thank you. Well, then we're really on the cutting edge. It's the new research. Jeonsu, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I have a serious answer and a silly answer to this that's actually kind of half serious. And the serious answer is that I would love to see more collaborations between game designers and clinicians like therapists, social workers, to make games that have a really strong framework for like therapeutic use, and specifically also for therapists to like have more tools and resources when it comes to talking about these kinds of experiences with clients. Because sometimes, you know, if I go see a therapist to talk about this really intense experience I had playing Deranged, and I have to start from, again, the ground up to explain like what is LARP, why would this like have such an effect on me, how is it different from other mediums, like, or different from if I were to have watched a play that was about the same subject. That can take up a lot of time in and of itself. And just again, just taking that time to explain at the beginning, there might be things that don't get communicated correctly. And I also just would be really interested to see what kind of LARPs and you know, in tabletop role-playing games and other gaming experiences, therapists would create in collaboration. Like where do they see the most value? What kind of avenues would they like to explore? And also because they can also point out red flags that I as a designer might not be able to see because I don't have a history or training as a therapist or a counselor. And that is my serious answer. My silly answer is that I play VR mini golf with my partner all the time. And it's like a beautiful settings in this virtual world. And I keep saying, I really want to LARP in this environment. And we joke about whether the mini golf would be like a mechanic in the game for conflict resolution or not. But I do think that there is some interesting avenues to explore with VR, granted that there's also a lot of pitfalls and stuff, but there's a lot of room for creating really interesting worlds and just being able to have even just voice interaction with people while sitting in this space that was created specifically for a LARP, or that you have to design a LARP around to fit a silly mini golf course.
Thank you. I've actually been on a panel at the Swedish Game Conference talking about why LARP is awesome and why VR is shit. Mostly because we need some tension. I do actually think VR could be very interesting in relation to games and to non-digital games also. John, do you want to finish us off?
Sounds great, thank you. So I think RPGs as tools can increase empathy in low empathy situations, specifically in relation to my past work. I've done a lot of leading product design and user experience teams, building systems for government agencies. And in those practices, we have a lot of tools that we use to empathize with the people we are helping. There's personas, there's user journeys, there's empathy maps, but a lot of these tools feel like 40 years ago. Whereas like with RPGs, I feel like we're iterating so fast, people can't keep up. And so there are a lot of techniques we've taken from RPGs and then applied them to these fairly traditional, fairly old tools. For example, in product design, you might have a user journey where you have columns and you say, okay, a person wakes up, then they go to work, then they do this, then they do that, then they go home. And it like maps out all their pain points and obstacles they encounter. And so we've done things where we've taken the folks involved, both the people we're helping and the designers involved in the project, and then role played out those user journeys, physically gone to those locations where what we're describing happens, go into their workplaces, really get a 360 perspective on what's happening. And to just wrap this up, there's even really basic things about how we organize and run our games that can be useful tools. So for example, working for the Department of Child Services, there are often relationship visualization tools in those systems. And one thing we did is we implemented a relationship map that you would see commonly in a role-playing game directly into those government software systems, so that when someone's trying to figure out where to place an adopted child, they could see a whole map of their network of family connections, almost exactly the way you would see a character map in like a LARP. And by doing that, we increased children placed with other family members by 28%, which is something that lowers trauma in those situations where there's a traumatic situation. So I think there's a lot here that we can implement for the positive social change.
Thank you so much. I like that it was kind of going off on a happy tone, looking forward. I would love to have another panel about this, like 5 years from now, and just get to hear like all the amazing stuff you people have done in those 5 years, and come back with your hopefully positive war stories. So thank you for this, for being part of the panel. We are now gonna transition over to the Q&A session. So a reminder to all our participants and attendees who are here, please use the Q&A function, and please don't ask presenters to evaluate their, like a game you have done, because that's not what we're going to focus on today. But we have a question that I would like to ask you, and I think this can be very interesting in this panel since it's a bit spread. So why do you think that LARP, especially EduLARP, is so much more common in the Nordic peninsula? And we have one person here from the Nordic peninsula, but Katrin, you have also stayed here quite a while, but we also have, yeah, it's very interesting. I want to hear your different perspectives on this. Please just use the hand and we'll take it from there. Go ahead, Katrin.
Since you already mentioned my name, I felt that I would like to share that I lived in Sweden for 8 years, and I used to work as a teacher in several different schools. And one of the schools, the first one that I worked at, the first day I started my work there, they said, hi, you know, we have 4 key values at our school, and we are playful, open, respectful, and learning goal orientated. And, you know, like hearing these, you feel, okay, that is a safety net for EduLARP, right? And it is, I think, most of all, the playfulness, how you approach different subjects, different contexts, questions, even hard questions, that you always try to explore different sides, angles, and perspectives, and that you explore them open-mindedly and respectfully, meaning that hierarchies, as we experience them in German schools where I work now, that hierarchies do not exist in the same way. They do exist, of course, it's a school and there's grading and discipline and everything, yet it's a different attitude and a different approach, so that techniques such as EduLARP do not feel too alien and too difficult to implement. We have conducted interviews with German teachers, and they've said that just the mere swapping of role, like going from the hierarchy teacher-student to on par and exploring something together, that feels very difficult in everyday teaching.
Thank you. I love that. I get to hear a lot that Nordic people are very stiff and uptight, and to hear us described as playful makes me very happy as a Swede. Who want to jump in? Give us all your what do you call it? All your ideas about what this could mean and how we are up here in the Nordics, or how it works in your part of the world. Yes, Jeonsu.
So kind of very broadly speaking here for a moment, I think that one of the main differences that I have noticed is kind of almost a semantics thing, I suppose, where in the US and in other places as well, but obviously I'm based in Texas and Virginia for the most part, and I have LARPs mostly kind of on the East Coast of the United States, and then gone abroad to various Nordic countries and then the UK to also play games. So I have a decent kind of idea of differences. But one issue that I tend to face much more often in the US is the idea of games being something that are just frivolous, kind of, and the idea of fun being something that is very specific, as in fun, the way that Monopoly is supposed to be fun, instead of fun as being something that could be transformative, that could be serious. And I think we really struggled here. And same thing, applies to video games a lot of the time, and in tabletop games and various forms of entertainment in general. But there are certain subject matters where people just feel like, oh, this is inappropriate for this to be addressed in a game. And it tends to be anything that's, remotely kind of heavier or deals with trauma, or anything that's kind of very political. For instance, the idea is that that's not appropriate for a game because people don't often still see games as an art form. They're seen again as like, this is the entertainment in the way that like a Marvel movie is entertainment. They don't see it necessarily as a legitimate form of art that needs to be studied and is worthy of study, and of being explored in the way that other art forms like a novel or a play would be explored. So I think we're still kind of running into that as a big obstacle, just this attitude about what games are in art. And I would like to be optimistic about that changing over however many years, but it's still, and I do think it is getting better. But I don't feel like I have to have this preamble of, when I say game, I don't mean we're like gonna just laugh the entire time when I am talking about LARPs with crowds that have experience outside of just some of the LARPs in games in the United States. And it would be lovely if I didn't have to do that preamble every time when I'm like talking to a new group that's US based.
Lauri, as a fellow Nordic representative, do you have any thoughts here?
I think Jeonsu, really interesting approach that you have there. Perhaps I have some experience with EduLab, but maybe more on the art and transformative and entertainment side of live action role playing games. But I think the question of what are games, how we talk about them, how they are portrayed in the media, how they are discussed is really important. And looking into Finland, I think one thing we have here, for instance, is a huge mobile games industry, and how it is portrayed in the largest national newspapers is that's a positive, a business. Mobile games is a business, and then you make money out of mobile games, and that's a narrative. And I think that's really short-sighted into what does it take to make that money, and how you use the attention of millions of people to transform that into money, and how ethical is that. That is not being business. That's just one example of how narrow our view on what games may be. And I think it requires some institutions also to legitimize and change the perspective of what games are. And a couple of examples from what I've encountered here is first the game museum that has opened in Tampere in Finland, which is, I think, a lovely place, because it shows that games have a history, they are valuable, they are important. Second is the university level game education that we have in Finland, that is both applied as well as theoretical, which I think is really important in contributing to the discussion here. Third are kind of non-profit organizations that contribute towards the discussion and awareness about what games are. And a fourth example that I came across personally was a board gaming cafe in Copenhagen that I visited a couple of weeks ago. That was just absolutely fantastic, and made me feel that board gaming is also a hobby that there are actually people, and hundreds of people came there. And again, a place that draws people together shows that this is a legitimized shared experience. So I think these sort of structures are needed.
I must agree with this. I also would actually like to add something myself that I thought about is a structural level here, that in Sweden, for example, the government puts away money specifically for doing arts and doing all kind of things like that in schools that is outside of the curriculum. So if it's something that is part of the curriculum, you can't apply for money because then it's already integrated. And if it's not, you can apply for money. And I know a lot of LARPs being run in schools in Sweden are through with the help of those kinds of money that are put away, that are tax money. So that's like a political level that they decided that it's important to actually put money into having all these kind of aesthetical experiences for children also. So would like to add that. Thank you so much. We do have time for one more question. Right now, I don't have one popping up.
I sent you one, Sparkle.
Oh,
in the
sorry.
chat.
I need to check the right chat. Too many chats up. Let's see. Yes, sorry. Okay. So how can safety be rebuilt in role-playing environments if individuals feel temporarily unsafe? Yes, Elektra.
I think that first of all, it matters a lot where did the temporary unsafeness come from. What I want to say is not did it come from player A or player B or whatever, but I think that not only in games but specifically in role-playing games, a player can feel unsafe not only because of the game design or because of the environment or because of another player, but it also sometimes comes from within. So I think that defining and trying to understand what is the element that has made the player feel unsafe in the first place is the most important thing, to see then how you can deal with it. And I think also that something that should, in my opinion, always be there is the space for this player to express what exactly they have lived, what they experienced, what they felt, and to be validated no matter what exactly it was, not to be judged or not to be evaluated or not to be compared with anybody else's experience. It doesn't matter if I don't know, it was a LARP of 150 people and everybody else felt safe. One person felt unsafe, and this is something that should be given enough time and space. Having said that, I think it's important in order to accomplish these things for a person to be there and to be assigned with that exact role, to be there for the player if the need arises to talk about safety issues at any point before, during, or after the game. And it should be, needless to say, a person that has the necessary skills in order to undertake such a role. I think that if those, let's say, prerequisites are there, then depending on what exactly has happened and why, there are many tools that one can use in order to reinstate the safety for that player, but also for the rest of the group.
Thank you so much. John, would you like to build on that? Or do you have a totally different angle here?
I think it goes along with what Elektra was saying. In my opinion, it helps to practice these techniques and to ritualize them so that they no longer feel special or out of place or like disruptive. So for example, I will often use safety tools or techniques for things that are not major issues, right? So like if it's a tonal thing or a minor content thing, we'll incorporate different techniques just for the purposes of having an excuse to practice these tools so everyone's used to it. Additionally, what we will often try to do is ritualize saying thank you when someone else establishes a boundary, right, to validate them. So if someone says, hey, I'm going to utilize this technique to take power in the situation and express myself, then having the other person say, I hear you, I agree with you, I validate you, thank you for letting me know, and then moving on. I think if you see that happening again and again and again, it just becomes secondhand nature.
Thank you. I do agree. It's super important. One of the LARPs I've been to where it worked really well, where we started to like find the balance, was a lot of checking in going on meanwhile. And that made a difference, I would definitely say. Okay. I want to give a huge, big thank you to all our panelists for being here today with their brilliant minds, giving us all these insights, both in your presentations, but also during the panel today. This was the last event for this semester. And I hope to see all of you in the fall again. To keep updated, make sure to follow us on Facebook and on YouTube. And on YouTube, you will also find the recordings of all the previous events. And you can find us there by searching for the Transformative Play Initiative. And the same goes for Facebook. So thank you so much, everyone, for today. And have a nice summer.